What's up, everybody? Welcome to CPI. I'm the only idiot in the room, Guard 710, president of Dominican University of California. Um, I am finally doing re-recording this, so I recorded part two on Sunday and then messed up part of it. So re-recording it, hopefully I don't mess it up. So let's just jump into it. So we got some more questions to address, I think, based on the time length of the mysterious non-uploaded video. I'll probably do another part, a third part. And so, if you have more questions, feel free to drop them in the comments or DMs or PMs. So yeah, let's jump into it. So we got a question um a, on a comment, and so we're a sucker. I'm a sucker for comments, increase that engagement. um and so let's see, not Texas, it was Minnesota Crookston's president, Coach RA, asked us to look at their roster here. So um I mean, the first thing you probably notice is that there's, a senior five-star in Maurice Walsh, who's very, very good. And then not much else. There's not much depth. And so um, it's really tough to, like, for me to work with that roster because it's not the type of roster I usually run. So I'll try to give advice, but it's going to be um, maybe different than what you want to run or what your ideas are, Coach RA. But yeah, it's just how I would do it. Um, and yeah, so, and it might sound harsher than it is, but just trying to help you to win and be successful in this game, how I would do it, and that may not be how you want to play. And so just keep that in mind. But yeah, so it all starts and almost ends with Walsh. I mean, he should have the ball in his hands as much as possible, probably shooting as much as possible. Um, and so I think he should play point guard. I mean, based on his ratings, it looks like he can play almost anywhere, but based on his height, I'd say he should probably stick to the perimeter. So, given that he's your best passer, tied for your best ball handler, your fastest guy, your smartest player, tells me point guard. Your best perimeter defender, even though he's also your best interior defender. Yeah, so I think he should be your point guard. So if Walsh is locked at the one, let's figure out the other four positions. So, in terms of just importance, especially within the game of hardwood, the hierarchy of positions, center is the next most important. So let's figure out who your center is. And I think there's a pretty clear choice. It's Chad Rutherford. He is one of your tallest players. I know you have Gene Childress down here at over 7 feet, but Rutherford isn't bad uh, relative to some of your other options. He's got almost or over double the SI of Childress, so that's pretty crazy. Um, and again, for what we're looking for here, interior defense, strength. I mean, he's really lacking the rebounding, which is not great, but he's an okay scorer. He's your best inside scorer. So yeah, I mean, I think he should be your center. Um, so we have the one and the five locked up. Let's get the two, three, four. I think you got to play Zorich. He's your, freshman, 13 pot four-star. You got to play him. And based on his ratings, to me, he kind of leans towards small forward, I would say, maybe shooting guard. He's got some speed relative to the rest of your roster. He can kind of handle the ball, kind of shoot, kind of okay, play defense. I mean, it's not great. When I'm looking at these ratings, again, I'm looking at it through a manager who's been in Legends for over 10 seasons in a row. So my view of this type of roster, which this is an LO6 roster, is kind of skewed. I have an LO6 roster too, but I haven't paid as much attention to it, so I haven't like scouted out my opponents or anything. Um, so I'm not really like sure what is acceptable in LO6 these days. Obviously I was an LO6 at some point, but it was a much different game over 20 seasons ago. And so yeah, I'm not sure. But typically when I look at a roster in terms of like just strength and weaknesses, and I'll look at it like this, I simply look for like 10 or above is like relatively okay, and then below 10 is a weakness to try to target, basically. And I mean, I don't want to like just stick to those hard numbers, but just visually, like that's what's striking to me because simply put, 10 and over are double digits, so that's going to stick out more in my eyes. Um, there's a lot more that goes into it, and that's why I like hardwood more than broken bat. In broken bat, they're very strict on like, oh, this player with this range has to be this position, or like this, your catcher has to have this level arm strength, or that your center fielder has to have this level range and speed. And so basketball isn't quite like that. Yeah, I'll probably get into this later, but I wanted to make sure I hit it now. You have five players working as a unit, and there's so much more that goes into things. Speed and IQ really are modifiers on everything else. And obviously, there's height that isn't always taken into account properly, and weight, and wingspan, and vertical as well. And then there's tactics too. Baseball doesn't have all of that going for it. It's really much more about ratings pretty much on each individual play. So, um, yeah, I think that's something to consider with this roster too, because I think you can make a little bit more out of it than like what is initially seen here, like just face value. Because right, yeah, like on face value, it's not very strong. So, right, that's how I'll caution this. But yeah, so let's see. So if Zorge is at, let's say small forward, because I think I have an idea for a shooting guard, um, which should be actually, as I'm saying that, I'm like, maybe not. Um, yeah, let's put Zorge as shooting guard then. So then I would say power forward is pretty obviously to me, uh, Adele here, because he's got number one, the size, um, which yeah is essentially almost it. In LO6, size goes a long way, I'll say. It's not all that matters, but it helps a lot. Um, and I think Childress is even playable here because of that 6'6" rebounding interior defense. I know he's one strength. That's very, very not good, but size alone will help him out. I think that your small forward could be any one of Thurman or Sisk or even Waters. Um, I don't know where I'd go. I maybe go with Sisk, at least shortest. Yeah, that's tough. Um, yeah, so I think you got some options there, I'll say. And they're not ideal, but yeah, I'd play around with that. So I'd say that's my advice for this roster. I mean, you're stuck with this roster this season. Make the best of what you can with it. I would just say I would caution against recruiting and building a roster like this. We'll get into it, but like you have nothing around Walsh, and so I'm sure you hoped Walsh would help lead you to Division One, the high ranks and stuff. But like, I mean, he's been in LO6 his whole career. He's gonna be in LO6 his whole career. So, you know, I don't know. It's to me, if you want to play like that, that's fine. You want Walsh to be a superstar who scores a lot. That's great. But for me, I like winning, and clearly you haven't won a lot. And so I don't think this style has led to it. And so maybe you want to change it up. Um, so I would just suggest, changing it up. Hopefully obviously you listened to the previous episode, I assume, and hopefully you listen to the rest of this episode so you can get some tips. And obviously all of our previous episodes I think are still pretty applicable. I know it's been over 10 seasons since, over 15 seasons, I think, since those really were recorded. So, maybe some's changed, but not a lot. So yeah, let's get into like roster building then. I know people wanted to talk about like my recruiting methods and approach to tactics and game planning and roster building. So let's get onto that. Yeah, so that's the next question here. My approach to tactics, game planning, and recruiting, and how they've changed. And so that's a really fascinating aspect to that question, I think, because I had to really think deep to to when I first started. And so, the first tactical change I remember making was simply to pace. I'd kept the default pace, which I believe is neutral. And so then I upped the pace. I forget to what exactly in a game. I don't remember which game, but I just decided to. And then I won, and it felt like that was a great change to make. So I kind of stuck with it, and ever since Dominicans run like up tempo a little bit, definitely not as up tempo as some teams out there, but a little bit more. Although we usually fall on like the slower side of our conference, which is kind of crazy to me. Um, but yeah, I mean, going faster seemed to lead to more wins. It seemed like so. I remember realizing that, and so yeah, we've stuck with it. But when I picked up other teams, I wanted to slow it down and see how that worked. And so when I picked up College of New Rochelle, they were like a neutral team, and then when I played with Cal, they were a slow team. Because actually, there's some tangents. So some like stories of my life that really like molded how I think about basketball, how I like basketball. And so I'll say, I went to Cal Berkeley for undergrad and I grew up in Berkeley, so I watched the Golden Bears play basketball a lot. And when I was growing up, I'd see Cal play this like slow defensive game style. And so I really like that. I love the idea of like stifling a team's offense, shutting them down. As a basketball player myself, not that I'm that good or anything, but I always really prided myself in my defense and shutting someone down. There's a few times where I can think I did that, and it was so satisfying, and just I love that. So yeah, I wanted my teams to play like that. People talk about like Virginia, the University of Virginia being like boring basketball stuff. Like I love that. That's my jam. So yeah, and then another story is, I went to a summer camp where we'd play basketball some, and one of the campers there was like a legit D1 recruit. And he's just messing around, so he wasn't being that serious, but he was still like so much better than all of us. And so there's a story of how, two teams played, and one of them had him on it and they were great. So the other team, in order to beat them, the strategy was to simply um, hold the ball as long as possible, just like run it down to the shot clock when they had the ball for as long as possible. And so they ended up winning that game. And so, that's like the type of like strategy and like unique thinking I liked with the game. And so I tried to bring that into hardwood. Um, yeah, so that was interesting. And so otherwise, I've just learned a few things every couple seasons and applied them slowly and just seeing how they worked, because I think this game really teaches and like hones someone's patience and um yeah, I think patience is like the most impulse control. So, we all want to like make changes and see them work right away. It doesn't always work like that. And so, and obviously like taking one game sample is like not a good idea, statistically speaking, right? I mean, this is an algorithm game, and so it's going to take like the most likely statistical thing to happen and or run it through an algorithm, right? And so you need to like give something a few games, at least several games, preferably several seasons even, to like really see how it works. So give things time and be patient. Um, don't just rush into things if you can help it. So yeah. Otherwise, I talk with some of the best managers in the game pretty much daily. They know who they are, and I don't want to like dox my inner circle too much, but probably some people know anyways. Um, but we just bounce ideas off each other pretty much every season. We talk to each other about like some tactical advice, um, especially when we're having trouble. And this community is really good because we're all willing to help each other, even though we're rivals. We play against each other. We're trying to fight for the same conference titles, national championships, and so even the same recruits. And so, but we're all willing to help each other. And so that's really awesome. Uh, so yeah, even still in recent seasons, I think each of us have learned a lot and lean on each other quite a bit. I leaned on them for the national championship game to game plan and look at things with me. So, that was so helpful. They earn a big credit of that win and that run. Because you make a run like that, the pressure's on, you feel it, and like you're kind of going a little crazy. So yeah, it was really helpful. So some of the changes that I've made throughout the season, like I'll I don't remember everything, and there's been little tweaks here and there, but one of them I will bring up is like, how do you defend threes, right? When a team shoots a lot of threes, how do you defend that? How do you stop that? Um, I'd say some people play more man-to-man defense, thinking that like, you won't get your defenders won't get lost in, the train in the screens and the running around, and just stick to their man on the perimeter, and theoretically defend the shot better. Some people extend the defense, that's in the game manual. You extend the defense out, um, to defend the three better, right? That makes sense to me. And some people actually press more, putting more pressure on the ball, whether that's like kind of like extending the defense, but not really, or if that's like disrupting the offense from its flow. I don't know. There's lots of questions with like how some of these things work, and we've never gotten an answer. I don't expect to. So it's kind of just like how you envision it, and then what you're comfortable with and what seems to work. I mean, there's so many things I have questions with this game. Like, do individual coaches have like certain styles of like, what they like to run in terms of their defensive settings? I think that's an interesting question. Another one I have with like extending the defense specifically is like, is plus one, is that like or is the scale like about a frequency, or is it by the extent? I mean, for lack of a better word, that the defense shifts, right? So like, is -3 versus -5, is -5 just like way more packed in, or is that packed in more often, but it's the same amount of packed in as the -3, right? I don't know. And obviously same with like +3, +5, is the plus 5 like way out there, or compared to the +3, or is it the same distance extension just more frequently? Or is it both? I mean, I don't know. Um, right. So other tactical stuff, I think one thought in my mind that I've always abided by, with these sim games at least, is that, if your team has more talent than the other team, and talent comes in many different forms, but if you simply think your team is better than theirs, you play faster and to increase the possessions, because I tried to explain this mathematically in the other video, and I don't know if I really did it right. But when you increase possessions, let's say you play 100 possessions, right? So let's say each team gets 50, and so the better team will score 35 times out of those 50, right? Versus the worst team, out of their 50, they'll score 25. And so obviously 35 outscores 25. Um, 3-pointers, 2-pointers, well, we don't need to mind that right now. But yeah, so that's pretty simple, right? But let's say we play uh 10 possessions, right? So each team gets 5. So now we're talking, uh the better team scores 3 times out of those 10, or out of those 5, and the underdog, the worst team, scores twice, 2 times. Obviously, that team still loses, but it's a lot closer theoretically. And you could just easily see like a scenario where that flips, right? Let's say it's now 8 possessions, 4 and 4 each, and they each scored twice. Now it's tied. And so you can easily see how decreasing the possessions changes that margin for error, really. And so if you're the underdog, therefore you want to play slower in order to limit possessions and increase variance. When you play faster, you play more possessions. That's more chances for the better team to exert their advantage over the other team. And so it's kind of mathematical. I mean, this game again is math. Shout out to what, Molenberg's president. It's just math because it really is. Um, yeah, there's other stuff involved, but it really is. Um, I play faster these days because, to be honest, rarely I'm the underdog. So yeah. But with Cal, even though I wasn't the underdog as much, I'd still play slower. And I think that did lead to some upsets sometimes against me. But it also led Cal to just like eviscerate some teams like out of the blue. Like Cal, I'd play -2, -3 sometimes, and they'd score like 110 points just out of the blue and blow some team out for some reason. I don't know how or why, but slow teams can definitely be very effective. Um, so yeah, I don't uh sorry, I'm trying to read my notes. So, but there's limitations to both ends really. I don't want to slow my team down too much because I might take my team out of its rhythm. It might, let the other team into the game, right? And so we can talk about like halftime adjustments for that or, you know, minutes management, stuff like that. So, people, I guess there's not necessarily rhythm in hardwood, but I think there is kind of this like feel that you have for your team. Like I definitely have it. Like sometimes I just feel really in sync with my teams and sometimes I don't. And, that is pretty correlative with the success of my team. But yeah. Um, and obviously like take into account like flourish in a fast-paced struggling and whatnot, because obviously those are big determinants. So yeah. In terms of game planning, what has changed? Yeah, I mean, before, when I didn't know what I was doing, I don't even remember how long I was spending, but I'd start to spend some, and then it just increased, as I got more into the game. And remember, I got into the game May 2020, and so that was like a couple months into the pandemic. My 4-year anniversary is coming up in the game. And so I really didn't have much else to do, so I'd spend a lot of time game planning. I remember like I might have infamously said for my 2018 Division Two championship title game, I spent like 5 hours game planning that night, which is true. Um, is that a good idea? No, that's horrible. I should have slept and not racked my brain and nerves. Um, but yeah, yeah, I did used to spend a lot of game planning. I don't as much anymore. Um, but there are some times where it still requires that much. I'd say I used to spend like 30 minutes to 2 hours game planning, like on average. And now it's probably on the lower end of that average um, per game. But yeah, there's still some games that take a few hours, like, the national championship, some of the games in the final in the national tournament run for me this past season. Yeah, definitely were a few hours, but not like a few hours straight. Go had something to do at work that broke it up, or I went to go cook dinner or go out with friends or go for a walk or a run. So it wasn't like hours on straight, but I would think about the game throughout those times and the matchups and all, and then come back to it later on and look at like what I was thinking about and see how that might work. Um, so yeah, I'd say games that give me a lot of trouble are um just games that I can't figure it out. I kind of talked about it a little bit in the first episode. Like, if there's like a lot of scenarios that my opponent can choose from, that will make it harder for me to like work through each of those and figure out what's my best plan to stop each one of them, or at least the most likely ones, or the ones I want to stop the most, right? Um, so yeah, and sometimes you just can't figure it out. And so the solution, honestly, is to just trust your gut or trust your default settings, because they're there for a reason. And like if you're at least for me, because yes, my team is relatively successful. So my default settings, my gut has gotten me to this point. And so I can kind of just trust it sometimes, let things ride. The important thing is to just decide because at worst, you lose, and then it'll help you figure out something for the next time you play them or a similar team. And so it's about establishing like the time in the game to get the feel. But you need the data points in order to develop that feel. You can't just start from game one and get this like whole manual. I know there is a game manual, but it doesn't tell you everything, and neither will our show, because I don't know all the answers, and my tactics, my game plan is very specific to me and my team, and it may not fit you and what you want to do, so how you want to play. So take all that into account. Yeah. And the other thing is like it's important to just decide quickly so you don't use all your like mental energy throughout the season, because I've definitely developed like fatigue towards the end of the season, uh, because I just spent so much game planning throughout the year. Um, and it just replenishes pretty quickly. Like every off season, I take, if I get eliminated pretty early in tournaments, like I'll take the time to just like step away from the game and not think about it. It really helps. And so, yeah, I mean, having that in small doses throughout the season will probably extend your ability to uh last, and so I think that's important to have. So yeah, making quick decisions helps in that regard. Winning also helps. I think I mentioned that last episode. And so yeah, that makes you feel good, and that helps prolong it too. Um, yeah. So let's see, game planning wise. So that was kind of like how some stuff has changed. Now to get into like I guess more of the nitty gritty. Last time I recorded this, I didn't have my water bottle, so my voice got really bad. So that's also why I'm re-recording. Um, yeah, I mean, I probably glazed over this in the first part, and we mentioned in the Discord since that actually, but I think I game plan a bit differently than others. Although then once the Discord discussion happened, it seemed like it's pretty similar. But I focus on stopping my opponent first and foremost, and that comes out in my like halftime adjustments. It's much more based on my opponent and what has happened in the game, um, versus I know some other teams might change something based on how the game has gone, but more so in like a proactive way, or their team focused way. And so I thought that was interesting, and I'm gonna probably start implementing that too a little bit. I kind of already have a little bit, but it's slow because I like how my styles work too. But yeah, I mean, I focus on my opponent first and foremost. I look at their lineup and focus on their starters. So I'll go to their depth chart and look at who starts, who gets the minutes, and who gets it where. Um, and then so yeah, I'll start with the depth chart, and then I'll go to their roster and really look at their roster. I'll look at those players who get playing time and look at their ratings, of course, their skill, their physical measurements, and then go to their stats page. And usually I have all these tabs open. And then I try to look at like how do they score, so that's obviously who scores, who does the scoring, who shoots from where, where does the whole team in general shoot from and score from, and then how can I stop that? And so then I'll go back to their roster, and I'm looking at ratings and seeing how that matches up with the numbers that I just saw on the stats page. um and yeah, I mean, I'll try to match up my guys with their guys basically. Um, and I kind of got into that with the individual game plan for Indiana last year. But yeah, it's like, is my small forward as big and fast as their small forward? Is he as good of a defender as their guy's a shooter, right? Um, so it's basically that at each position. Um, and then I'll start to think about like, okay, how can I attack them based on this lineup that I've built to stop them? Um, so yeah, that's basically it. Um, I would call that a very preventative style of play. And other people are more aggressive or proactive, as I said. So yeah, I'd say I'm preventative and reactive based on how I play. I look at what my opponent has done in the past few games. Maybe they changed their lineup, and so that doesn't always come across in the depth chart or the stats page, or they change on like who's their go-to scorer, right? So, that can reflect a lot. When I was going through the the run in the national tournament, like I think it was Prairie A&M, they they had a bit of a difference between like their conference stats, like in conference stats versus their overall. So they changed something with regards to like who shoots the ball more, right? Who's their focus. Um, Someone else did that too. I think was it Auburn Montgomery? I forget. But yeah, so that's also important to consider, right? So that because that might change like who plays where, right? Um, because you want your good defenders on their best offensive players and you want to maybe hide your worst defender, basically, right? So figuring that out is important. So, when I go to a team's stats page, uh, let's see, I don't want to go to my own. That seems suicidal. Let's go to UC San Diego's for some reason. So when I go to when I go to this team, right? So I'm looking at again who plays where, right? So I'll look at this and yeah, it's pretty simple. Um, who's shooting well, right? Who is shooting from three often and how well? Who's scoring the ball? So like when I break this down, it's like this number, I'm looking for like 50 to 60% in terms of shooting well. I mean, 45 is pretty good for a perimeter player. To 43.7 is like, okay, it's not awesome. Anything under 40, even under 42 is like not good to me. From three, typically I think of like 35% as like the mark. And then in terms of like how often from three, if they're shooting around a third of their overall field goals as threes, so 21 divided by 66, so it's like a little less than 33%, a third of their shots. So like they're a little more of an inside focused team or mid-range than outside. But like that 33 mark is kind of that even break even point. If they're above that, like significantly above, I'm talking like 38% or so, then they're like more of a three-point shooting team. Again, that's not the three-point percentage. That's how many of the percentage of shots they take as threes. Some people get confused. Um, I kind of look at the distance. It's not really that informational. That's not the right word. It doesn't tell me a lot because usually the number's like between 8 and 10 anyways. If it's outside of that, that's crazy. And that should definitely tell you where they shoot from. Um, but yeah, between 8 and 10 is like pretty balanced, I think. Points in the paint. I mean, if it's in a crazy number like over 40, then yeah, they're probably scoring in the paint a lot. If it's under 30, they're probably not. So I don't know. Like I don't think it really tells you that much. Because it can get skewed by a lot by like fast break points as well. But fast break points I think can be pretty determining or in I don't know the right word. It can tell you a lot uh based on like or tell you a lot about the pace they run. Although I would look for like 10 or above is like pretty fast. And I mean 8, 9 are like kind of normal. Anything like 6 is like really is pretty slow. Yeah. The other things I look at like defense, of course, here, I mentioned that before. You want to look at like, oh, Lopez is not a great defender in general because he allows like 52% inside the arc, 36 from three. It's not horrible, but it's not great. But like Robinson is a really good defender, at least inside the arc for I assume a perimeter player. Yeah. So, because 43% inside the arc is really good versus 35.6% from three is like it's good, but it's like not elite, certainly. Um, so breaking it down like that, right? Here's Campbell's numbers. So then the other thing I'll look at like the foul stuff and turnovers, who obviously like Lang was their point guard because he has the most turnovers. Like that's pretty simple, but 3.2 turnovers, it doesn't sound like a lot on the surface, but then I see he only played 27 minutes a game. So that is actually kind of a lot. Like that's a pretty high turnover rate. Um, Although maybe not. I got to think about that. I don't know. I've seen worse numbers, certainly. But personal fouls, like this is pretty good. Um, obviously it tells you who's like a little more foul prone. So does DQs. I'd look for like 3 and above is like pretty foul prone. Uh, twos is like kind of normal. Ones is really good. Like that's not a lot of fouls. That's crazy. Um, and same with Campbell. That's pretty good. Fouls drawn is pretty important. It tells you obviously who has the ball, but also like who's driving or who's inside, because that's where most of the fouls take place. Again, 3 and above is like a lot. 2.5 is kind of normal. Under 2 is not a lot. Although it's obviously skewed by like, if they're a bench player, I mean, sure, they're not drawing a lot of fouls in total, but like the rate might be kind of high. So you kind of have to do some math there. I'd say like 1 per 10 minutes though is kind of the range I'd think of. And then I look at usage rate. So, usage rate, it's 100 divided by 5 is like the random distribution on average. So 20% is what you would think of like for if everybody got an equal share, right? So if they're above that, they're taking more of their share and thus taking away from someone else. So 20 is like the average, or 20 is the number I look for in general, but it's kind of like that's a very balanced attack, right? If they're over 25, if they're like 27, 30, that's a lot versus like if they're at 15, that's not a lot. So that tells you like who's shooting the ball mainly, right? Who has the ball a lot. So those numbers are all pretty helpful in determining, how to defend a team basically and or attack them and too. Okay, so then to recruiting, um, yeah, I mean, this kind of talks about another question, the next question really, but I used to track each and every player I invested in, and actually, uh, the TPI group, we would all have a document where we would track each and every player we invested in and all the amounts of contacts that it took to rise each sub level of interest. So, we kind of got this big database on how many points should it take to reach on this type of player, because we also had like star rating information, potential, geography, their location, right? Competition. There was other notes, like obviously the prefer to play close to home or has no preference, those type of comments too. So yeah, we got a pretty good idea. We actually don't have that sheet anymore. We haven't used it in a while, and I think it's deleted because uh, someone lost their email. So um, yeah, we don't use that anymore. But it's less important now because, at least for me, because being in Legends, I have a lot of the power compared to a lot of teams in the game. And I don't have to be as efficient with my points anymore. Like back then, it was like I had to be so efficient and like thread the needle to be perfect. If I sensed that there was any player who didn't want to play for me, I had to bail and pivot because I didn't want to waste all those points, right? Because it really set me back. Versus now, it's like honestly, I think I've thrown away like 50 plus contacts on players like every few seasons because it's just not as necessary. Um, yeah, I mean, you look at my recruiting board this season, like I think I'm on like 11 seniors is what Lubin's told me. I was like, wow, that's a lot. That means I've invested in all of those guys, right? Because they show up to other teams, right? That's not even counting the guys who I have invested in and don't show up on, right? So yeah. Um, which there are none. Okay, right. And I think I'm pretty famous for I've said often like I try to avoid recruiting battles like so much that I will never battle. But that's definitely changed. I try to avoid them as much as I can, but I'll definitely jump in some, or I definitely won't be afraid to battle someone on a target that I already have been on. So, um, yeah. I mean, that's definitely changed. Um, what else? What else? I still get that feeling of like wanting to pivot though whenever another team comes on to one of my targets. Like once another team shows up and like shows strong interest, if they just get to low, I'm like, whatever. And I'm higher than that. I'm still fine. But if they get to medium or high, maybe this is giving away too much, but whatever. Spend your points on my guys. You're gonna lose. Um, it does make me want to pivot. It makes me look for like backup options at least, and then sometimes I'll just like find a more interesting player, especially relative to the cost. And so that then I'll switch. Like that happened with like Lenny McManus last year or a couple seasons ago. He was a 5-star in California, and he seemed like the best fit for me based on like the plan I had. And then I just like started to find flaws in him, and then USC, the team who ended up getting him, like raised up really to high interest, and I was like, yeah, maybe a 5-star isn't the idea. And so actually, this is kind of when I decided to stay with Dominican instead of leaving them in 2040. Because I was planning on taking him, not redshirting him, or no, I was planning on taking him, redshirting him, taking the penalty, and really like screwing over Dominican as I left. But then once I decided to stay, I was like, well, I don't want to screw over my recruiting, so I don't want him. So then I took a 2-star instead out of region. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, while I'm usually hesitant to stay in a battle or I just avoid them altogether, I will say I'm very stubborn when it comes to players I actually want. Like, I've some of the numbers I've spent on players: 150 on Hoffmeister, 176 on Barry Ford. Uh, Booker Calloway was like over 100, I think. He was a out-of-state 4-star in Ohio. Um, 13 pot, yeah. So I've rarely lost. Um, yeah, I'll talk. I mean, I guess what one of the previous or one of the later questions asked about like, oh, do you remember like your losses, or do you remember the players you didn't offer? Do you remember the misses? And I don't remember many of the players I didn't offer. I don't really remember like the players who I missed out on, because like they have rarely come back to like bite me so directly. Like I have rarely played against them. Actually, that team we just saw, UC San Diego, like Rodrigo Lopez is actually a guy who I like kind of wanted for a while, and then I had to make a choice between him and like really going crazy for Barry Ford. Sorry, I'm revealing all my like, these teams that I have pulled up for later. That's okay. You guys can get to see your teams. Well, that was one of the teams that wasn't there. Okay, so um, yeah, you see San Diego, like this kid, Rodrigo Lopez, like I was kind of on him. He was supposed to be the guard next to Barry Ford instead of Darren Mitchell here, my Richard Jr. 138 SI guy who's gonna start at shooting guard. It was supposed to be this guy actually. You can see Richard Jr. as well, so same year. Um, I did want this kid because I thought he would like be one of the best shooters in hardwood history, probably. Because I mean, he's a 19 OS. He's got a good range comment. Yeah, he's fast. So yeah, I this is one of the misses I think I have, but I didn't lose on him because at least I don't consider it a loss because I chose to stop investing in him basically. Yeah, yeah. But there was a guy who I lost out on. It wasn't really a regret. I just was like very confused. And so that's why it stuck with me. So it was an 11 pot 3-star guard named Bill Hart. And he ended up going to Long Beach State, which was an LO5 team at the time. This is Long Beach State. This is back in 2022. And not that guy, Bill Hart, this one. All right. Yeah, this guy. Like I don't remember even who he was supposed to be. Oh, Thomas Dawson, Choo Choo. Yeah. Yeah, he was supposed to be that guy. And so um I had like spent 40-ish contacts on him. And like actually I consider it a loss because I was still spending on him when he committed. All the other recruits pretty much that I've lost, I stopped spending on because I decided to go elsewhere basically, for any number of reasons. Whether it's because I found a flaw or just didn't think the cost was worth it, or I found a better player or player I liked more at least. Yeah, yeah. So that's always this one has always stuck with me though. Bill Hurt. Yeah. Why would he choose a LO5 team over an LO1 team? I don't know. I have no idea. But yeah, the thing that's probably changed the most actually is being more aggressive on underclassmen, especially freshmen. I used to not recruit freshmen like at all because I really like having that like at least one data point of that SI development, and preferably, two more, three, um, to really like m make sure I'm making a good investment. For me, it's really hard to like I'm a pretty risk averse person, so like the finality of investing your contacts is hard because you don't get them back. Um, and so I want to make sure I'm making a good investment. But, with more presidents who, presumably know the game better or watch these or, have learned more, um, they're spending earlier and earlier. And so like, yeah, having to be on freshmen is kind of necessary these days. But I wouldn't say it's like the priority. I don't think you should like do that first over other classes, you know. But yeah, that's something that's changed for me. Uh, in terms of like player builds, I've pretty much always looked for like the same stuff. I think standards of mine have kind of changed a little bit as I've moved up, but not all that much in my opinion. I'd say it's more been honed with more knowledge about physical growth and development. Those are the things that have changed for me. Especially with like I don't remember when it happened, but the change to like the SI growth curve, where it's more varied now and random as opposed to like linear and predictable, that's made things more interesting. Um, and I've had to change how I recruit a little bit with that. How I think I value like SI that's already in the bag, so like higher SI players now, which I guess isn't like that unique of a strategy, but I definitely don't go for like gems as much as I used to. Maybe that's more of a thing of like because I'm in Legends as opposed to like an LO6, but um yeah, that's something. I think high school development is still like the best determinant for future college development, but it's definitely harder to predict now. Um, I'd say I like value all of the skills just differently for each position. For instance, I simply used to not care about stamina basically because based on like how my rotations are, I limit my minutes. I don't try to fatigue my players that much anyways. Um, so I still don't really value stamina that highly, but it's like some. But I used to not also value like driving or finishing or even like ball handling on anything except my guards. Um, and I think I infamously said, like, give me all the big dummies, which are low IQ bigs, obviously. Because they don't need to be smart, right? They just need to grab ball, dunk ball. But everything but stamina has kind of changed, definitely. So yeah, yeah. So that's that question. That's like a half hour of talking for that. Yeah, so like I said, the recruiting method you use, I talked about that. Do you remember the guys you end up not putting offers in for? I don't track them like after college. There's a few I remember kind of, and then any really obvious misses or wrong decisions you recall. Like I said, not really. I mean, once they're on my team, I just focus on them, and if they're off my team, I don't really think about them that much until like I come across that team randomly, and then I'm like, oh, that team got that player, and I'll look him up, whether he's on their roster now, obviously, or an alum. Like a couple of examples I can think of are like Bradley Kane with seeing CSU Dominguez Hills. I did play him like directly in Legends, but that's maybe like the only time it's like directly I've had to directly play against him, a player. There was like John Perone who went to Baylor. He's a Texas guard. I looked at him and thought he might be the best perimeter defender I've ever seen based on his like dev because I think he was like a 2 to 9 in perimeter defense in high school, but also like super fast and like six. I think he's projected to go to like 6'4", 6'5". So I thought he might be like the best perimeter defender. And I think he ended up getting like 19 perimeter defense. he also had like good all around defense, not never be a good interior defender to him. So yeah, he was going to be really good. I think he ended up being pretty good. But yeah, I think I remember more of the players who I ended up getting and they ended up sucking. So, obviously Chubbs Chapman falls into that. In case people don't know, he was like this 6'7" power forward who could like shoot, was fast, could handle the ball, rebound. He wasn't great at defense though, but he was like not horrible. Um, but his development was really good in high school actually. So that's what surprised me. Um, he was a plus 13, plus 12, plus 10, plus 9. Okay, so it wasn't like incredible, but it was pretty solid. Nothing told me he was gonna just grow 7 in his redshirting year. And then, I mean, 10, 11, it was at 11. Nothing really spoke to me that that was gonna happen like that. And so, uh, I made up this story that he gained 20 pounds in his redshirting year to balloon up to 255 pounds. And so he was like just eating his way through the dining halls, basically. So I thought that was funny. Um, and then the other guy who, like, I would say makes me, how do I put this? Like, I don't recruit internationals, basically, is because of this guy. Grenade, which of course, he blew up in my face. That's why he's Grenade. Um, look at his development rates. These are awful. I don't even want to look at them. This is basically why I don't recruit internationals because he was so bad. Um, and then, I don't know if anyone's like reading the forums, but there's like a thread about Jose Carrasco, who is currently the top ranked prospect in the senior class. Um, And, I said basically like, I invested in him because at the time there was like maybe 2 teams on him at low, and now there's a lot more teams, one is at medium. And yeah, I've invested on him, but like I think I'm not investing on him anymore because I said in the forums like, oh, it's the 14 pot 5-star curse, which isn't a real thing, obviously, but it is in our group because we've each had a player or two that was a 14.5 star and like didn't live up to what our expectations were for that for various reasons. Um, for my example, it has to do with this guy, Andrew Grace. And so a lot of that is his build, basically. So, look at his highest ratings. It's in stuff that I like typically don't value a lot. Stamina and finishing. Um, I mean, yes, 18 outside shots really good. 19 ball handling is pretty good. But, if 37 of his points are wasted, and obviously he's got to have some, but like, if 17 of his points are wasted in a category like in categories like that could have gone elsewhere. That would have really helped him out, in my opinion. He was also kind of like a tweener. I was actually hoping he'd be 6'6", so 78 inches, um, and be like a backup power forward for me. But because he didn't quite hit that, and because of this build, um, I didn't know exactly where to play him. I needed a backup power forward, so he kind of did get some minutes there. I think you can see that in his freshman year, a little bit. But then I started moving him out towards the perimeter more and more, based just because how he was growing. And the other thing is like his 11 range is like it's not horrible, obviously, but it's also not very good. Um, which is what I was looking for a 14 pot. And I mean, it wasn't the development. His development was really good, 21, 12, 13, 12, and then a 19, a 20, a 19, and even a 15 in his senior year. So like that's really good development. So yeah, it was more the build that he was an issue. Carrasco, on the other hand, um, it's not the build. The build looks pretty solid, right? Pretty good perimeter orientations here. It's the development. So like 14 pot, I think the rule of thumb is typically like we want to see at least his potential worth in SI development, overall SI development. And so, I mean, we have a 14 year, that's good in his freshman year, but then 11, 10, kind of leading towards it not being very good. And so, again, it's kind of just something I saw that didn't really make me want to keep investing enough to try to win this. So yeah, that is why I don't want to. What does that get me on? Okay. I think I'll stop it there because the next question is also a pretty big one, and I don't want to like make this too long. So but I'll tease it. And so it's a general overview of how I built the team. And so I can definitely do that. And you probably have gotten trends, or if you know how I play, like you'll probably know. But yeah, I'll save that for next time. And right, yeah. So till next time, y'all. I don't know when the next one will be. Hopefully this weekend. I just had some stuff come up. And obviously, I tried to record this and it didn't work. And so hopefully I get the next part in sooner than later, hopefully this weekend. But yeah, stay tuned. I'll talk to you guys next time. Again, I'm gonna try to figure this out as I try to